Chapter 13 of Main Street by Sinclair Lewis. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 13. She tried, more from loyalty than from desire, to call upon the Perrys on a November evening when Kennicott was away. They were not at home. Like a child who has no one to play with, she loitered through the dark hall. She saw a light under an office door. She knocked. To the person who opened she murmured, "Do you happen to know where the Perrys are?" She realized that it was Guy Pollock. "I'm awfully sorry, Mrs. Kennicott, but I don't know. Won't you come in and wait for them?" "Why," she observed, as she reflected that in Gopher Prairie it is not decent to call on a man, as she decided that, no, really, she wouldn't go in, and as she went in. "I didn't know your office was up here." "Yes, office, townhouse, and chateau in Picardy. But you can't see the chateau and townhouse, next to the Duke of Sutherland's. They're beyond that inner door. They are a cot and a washstand and my other suit and the blue crepe tie you said you liked." "You remember my saying that?" "Of course. I always shall. Please try this chair." She glanced about the rusty office. Gaunt stove, shelves of tan law books, desk chair filled with newspapers, so long sat upon that they were in holes and smudged to grayness. There were only two things which suggested Guy Pollock. On the green felt of the table desk, between legal blanks and a clotted inkwell, was a cloisonné vase. On a swing shelf was a row of books unfamiliar to Gopher Prairie. Mosher editions of the poets, black and red German novels, a Charles Lamb in crushed Levant. Guy did not sit down. He quartered the office, a greyhound on the scent, a greyhound with glasses tilted forward on his thin nose, and a silky, indecisive brown mustache. He had a golf jacket of jersey, worn through at the creases in the sleeves. She noted that he did not apologize for it, as Kennicott would have done. He made conversation. "I didn't know you were a bosom friend of the Perrys. Chap is the salt of the earth, but somehow I can't imagine him joining you in symbolic dancing, or making improvements on the diesel engine." "No, he's a dear soul, bless him, but he belongs in the National Museum, along with General Grant's sword, and Oh, I suppose I'm seeking for a gospel that will evangelize Gopher Prairie." "Really? Evangelize it to what?" "To anything that's definite. Seriousness or frivolousness or both. I don't care whether it was a laboratory or a carnival, but it's merely safe. Tell me, Mr. Pollock, what is the matter with Gopher Prairie?" "Is anything the matter with it? Isn't there perhaps something the matter with you and me?" "May I join you in the honor of having something the matter?" "Yes, thanks." "No, I think it's the town." "Because they enjoy skating more than biology?" "But I'm not only more interested in biology than the Jolly 17, but also in skating. I'll skate with them, or slide, or throw snowballs, just as gladly as talk with you." "Oh, no." "Yes." "But they want to stay home and embroider." "Perhaps. I'm not defending the town. It's merely... I'm a confirmed doubter of myself. Probably I'm conceited about my lack of conceit. Anyway, Gopher Prairie isn't particularly bad. It's like all villages in all countries. Most places that have lost the smell of earth but not yet acquired the smell of patchouli, or of factory smoke, are just as suspicious and righteous. I wonder if the small town isn't, with some lovely exceptions, a social appendix. Some day these dull market towns may be as obsolete as monasteries. I can imagine the farmer and his local store manager going by monorail at the end of the day into a city more charming than any William Morris utopia. Music, a university, clubs for loafers like me. Lord, how I'd love to have a real club." She asked impulsively, Why do you stay here?" "I have the village virus." "It sounds dangerous." "It is. More dangerous than the cancer that will certainly get me at 50 unless I stop this smoking. The village virus is the germ which, it's extraordinarily like the hookworm, it infects ambitious people who stay too long in the provinces. You'll find it epidemic among lawyers and doctors and ministers and college-bred merchants, all these people who have had a glimpse of the world that thinks and laughs, but have returned to their swamp. I'm a perfect example. But I shan't pester you with my dolors." "You won't. And do sit down, so I can see you." He dropped into the shrieking desk chair. He looked squarely at her. She was conscious of the pupils of his eyes, of the fact that he was a man and lonely. They were embarrassed. They elaborately glanced away, and were relieved as he went on. "The diagnosis of my village virus is simple enough. I was born in an Ohio town about the same size as Gopher Prairie, and much less friendly. It had more generations in which to form an oligarchy of respectability. Here, a stranger is taken in if he is correct, if he likes hunting and motoring and God and our senator. There, we didn't take in even our own till we had contemptuously got used to them. It was a red-brick Ohio town, and the trees made it damp, and it smelled of rotten apples. The country wasn't like our lakes and prairie. There were small, stuffy cornfields and brickyards and greasy oil wells. I went to a denominational college and learned that since dictating the Bible and hiring a perfect race of ministers to explain it, God has never done much but creep around and try to catch us disobeying it. From college I went to New York, to the Columbia Law School, and for 4 years I lived. Oh, I won't rhapsodize about New York. It was dirty and noisy and breathless and ghastly expensive. But compared with the moldy academy in which I had been smothered, I went to symphonies twice a week. I saw Irving and Terry and Duzay and Bernhardt from the top gallery. I walked in Gramercy Park, and I read, everything. Through a cousin, I learned that Julius Flickerbaugh was sick and needed a partner. I came here. Julius got well. He didn't like my way of loafing 5 hours and then doing my work, really not so badly, in 1. We parted. When I first came here, I swore I'd keep up my interests. Very lofty. I read Browning and went to Minneapolis for the theaters. I thought I was keeping up. But I guess the village virus had me already. I was reading 4 copies of cheap fiction magazines to 1 poem. I'd put off the Minneapolis trips till I simply had to go there on a lot of legal matters. A few years ago, I was talking to a patent lawyer from Chicago, and I realized that I'd always felt so superior to people like Julius Flickerbaugh, but I saw that I was as provincial and behind the times as Julius. Worse, Julius plows through the Literary Digest and the Outlook faithfully, while I'm turning over pages of a book by Charles Flandrau that I already know by heart. I decided to leave here. Stern resolution. Grasp the world. Then I found that the village virus had me, absolute. I didn't want to face new streets and younger men, real competition. It was too easy to go on making out conveyances and arguing ditching cases. So, that's all the biography of a living dead man, except the diverting last chapter, the lies about my having been a tower of strength and legal wisdom, which some day a preacher will spin over my lean, dry body. He looked down at his table desk, fingering the starry enameled vase. She could not comment. She pictured herself running across the room to pat his hair. She saw that his lips were firm under his soft, faded mustache. She sat still and maundered, "I know, the village virus. Perhaps it will get me. Some day I'm going— Oh, no matter. At least I am making you talk. Usually you have to be polite to my garrulousness, but now I'm sitting at your feet. It would be rather nice to have you literally sitting at my feet by a fire." "Would you have a fireplace for me?" "Naturally. Please, don't snub me now. Let the old man rave." "How old are you, Carol?" "26, Guy. 26. I was just leaving New York at 26. I heard Patti sing at 26. And now I'm 47. I feel like a child, yet I'm old enough to be your father. So it's decently paternal to imagine you curled at my feet. Of course, I hope it isn't, but we'll reflect the morals of Gopher Prairie by officially announcing that it is. The standards that you and I live up to. There's one thing that's the matter with Gopher Prairie, at least with the ruling class. There is a ruling class, despite all our professions of democracy. And the penalty we tribal rulers pay is that our subjects watch us every minute. We can't get wholesomely drunk and relax. We have to be so correct about sex morals, and inconspicuous clothes, and doing our commercial trickery only in the traditional ways, that none of us can live up to it, and we become horribly hypocritical. Unavoidably. The widow-robbing deacon of fiction can't help being hypocritical. The widows themselves demand it. They admire his unctuousness. And look at me. Suppose I did dare to make love to some exquisite married woman. I wouldn't admit it to myself. I giggle with the most revolting salaciousness over la vie parisienne when I get hold of one in Chicago, yet I shouldn't even try to hold your hand. I'm broken. It's the historical Anglo-Saxon way of making life miserable. Oh, my dear, I haven't talked to anybody about myself and all ourselves for years. Guy, can't we do something with the town, really? No, we can't. He disposed of it like a judge ruling out an improper objection. Returned to matters less uncomfortably energetic. Curious. Most troubles are unnecessary. We have nature beaten. We can make her grow wheat. We can keep warm when she sends blizzards. So we raise the devil just for pleasure. Wars, politics, race hatreds, labor disputes. Here in Gopher Prairie we've cleared the fields and become soft, so we make ourselves unhappy artificially, at great expense and exertion. Methodists disliking Episcopalians, the man with the Hudson laughing at the man with the flivver. The worst is the commercial hatred, the grocer feeling that any man who doesn't deal with him is robbing him. What hurts me is that it applies to lawyers and doctors, and decidedly to their wives, as much as to grocers. The doctors. You know about that, how your husband and Westlake and Gould dislike one another. No, I won't admit it. He grinned. Oh, maybe once or twice, when Will has positively known of a case where one of the others has continued to call on patients longer than necessary, he has laughed about it, but... He still grinned. No, really. And when you say the wives of the doctors share these jealousies, Mrs. McGanum and I haven't any particular crush on each other, she's so stolid. But her mother, Mrs. Westlake, nobody could be sweeter. Yes, I'm sure she's very bland. But I wouldn't tell her my heart secrets if I were you, my dear. I insist that there's only one professional man's wife in this town who doesn't plot, and that is you, you blessed, credulous outsider. I won't be cajoled. I won't believe that medicine, the priesthood of healing, can be turned into a penny-picking business. See here, hasn't Kennicott ever hinted to you that you'd better be nice to some old woman because she tells her friends which doctor to call in? But I oughtn't to. She remembered certain remarks which Kennicott had offered regarding the widow Bogart. She flinched, looked at Guy beseechingly. He sprang up, strode to her with a nervous step, smoothed her hand. She wondered if she ought to be offended by his caress. Then she wondered if he liked her hat, the new oriental turban of rose and silver brocade. He dropped her hand. His elbow brushed her shoulder. He flitted over to the desk chair, his thin back stooped. He picked up the cloisonné vase. Across it he peered at her with such loneliness that she was startled. But his eyes faded into impersonality as he talked of the jealousies of Gopher Prairie. He stopped himself with a sharp, Good Lord, Carol, you're not a jury. You are within your legal rights in refusing to be subjected to this summing up. I'm a tedious old fool analyzing the obvious, while you're the spirit of rebellion. Tell me your side. What is Gopher Prairie to you? A bore. Can I help? How could you? I don't know. Perhaps by listening. I haven't done that tonight, but normally. Can't I be the confidant of the old French plays, the tiring maid with the mirror and the loyal ears? Oh, what is there to confide? The people are savorless and proud of it. And even if I liked you tremendously, I couldn't talk to you without 20 old hexes watching, whispering. But you will come talk to me once in a while. I'm not sure that I shall. I'm trying to develop my own large capacity for dullness and contentment. I've failed at every positive thing I've tried. I'd better settle down, as they call it, and be satisfied to be nothing. Don't be cynical. It hurts me in you. It's like blood on the wing of a hummingbird. I'm not a hummingbird. I'm a hawk, a tiny leashed hawk, pecked to death by these large, white, flabby, wormy hens. But I am grateful to you for confirming me in the faith, and I'm going home. Please, stay and have some coffee with me. I'd like to, but they've succeeded in terrorizing me. I'm afraid of what people might say. I'm not afraid of that. I'm only afraid of what you might say. He stalked to her, took her unresponsive hand. Carol, you have been happy here tonight. Yes, I'm begging. She squeezed his hand quickly, then snatched hers away. She had but little of the curiosity of the flirt, and none of the intrigante's joy in furtiveness. If she was the naive girl, Guy Pollock was the clumsy boy. He raced about the office. He rammed his fists into his pockets. He stammered, I... Oh, the devil! Why do I awaken from smooth dustiness to this jagged rawness? I'll make I'm going to trot down the hall and bring in the Dillons, and we'll all have coffee or something. The Dillons? Yes, really quite a decent young pair. Harvey Dillon and his wife. He's a dentist, just come to town. They live in a room behind his office, same as I do here. They don't know much of anybody. I've heard of them, and I've never thought to call. I'm horribly ashamed. Do bring them. She stopped, for no very clear reason, but his expression said, her faltering admitted, that they wished they had never mentioned the Dillons. With spurious enthusiasm he said, Splendid. I will. From the door he glanced at her, curled in the peeled leather chair. He slipped out, came back with Dr. and Mrs. Dillon. The four of them drank rather bad coffee, which Pollock made on a kerosene burner. They laughed and spoke of Minneapolis and were tremendously tactful. And Carol started for home through the November wind. End of Chapter 13. Chapter 14. Of Main Street, by Sinclair Lewis. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 14. She was marching home. No, I couldn't fall in love with him. I like him very much, but he's too much of a recluse. Could I kiss him? No, no. Guy Pollock at 26, I could have kissed him then, maybe, even if I were married to someone else, and probably I'd have been glib in persuading myself that it wasn't really wrong. The amazing thing is that I'm not more amazed at myself. I, the virtuous young matron. Am I to be trusted? If the Prince Charming came... A Gopher Prairie housewife, married a year, and yearning for a Prince Charming like a backfish of 16. They say that marriage is a magic change. But I'm not changed. But... No, I wouldn't want to fall in love, even if the prince did come. I wouldn't want to hurt Will. I am fond of Will. I am. He doesn't stir me, not any longer, But I depend on him. He is home and children. I wonder when we will begin to have children. I do want them. I wonder whether I remember to tell Bee to have hominy tomorrow instead of oatmeal. She will have gone to bed by now. Perhaps I'll be up early enough. Ever so fond of Will. I wouldn't hurt him, even if I had to lose the mad love. If the prince came, I'd look once at him and run. Darn fast. Oh, Carol, you are not heroic nor fine. You are the immutable vulgar young female. But I'm not the faithless wife who enjoys confiding that she's misunderstood. Oh, I'm not. I'm not. Am I? At least I didn't whisper to Guy about Will's faults and his blindness to my remarkable soul. I didn't. Matter of fact, Will probably understands me perfectly. If he would just back me up in rousing the town. How incredibly many wives there must be who tingle over the first Guy Pollock who smiles at them. No, I will not be one of that herd of yearners, the coy virgin brides. Yet, probably, if the prince were young and dared to face life— I'm not half as well oriented as that Mrs. Dillon, so obviously adoring her dentist, and seeing Guy only as an eccentric fogey. They weren't silk, Mrs. Dillon's stockings. They were lisle. Her legs are nice and slim, but no nicer than mine. I hate cotton tops on silk stockings. Are my ankles getting fat? I will not have fat ankles. No, I am fond of Will. His work. One farmer he pulls through diphtheria is worth all my yammering for a castle in Spain. A castle with baths. This hat is so tight. I must stretch it. Guy liked it. There's the house. I'm awfully chilly. Time to get out the fur coat. I wonder if I'll ever have a beaver coat. Nutria is not the same thing. Beaver glossy. Like to run my fingers over it. Guy's mustache like beaver. How utterly absurd. I am fond of Will, and— can't I ever find another word than fond? He's home. He'll think I was out late. Why can't he ever remember to pull down the shades? Cy Bogart and all the beastly boys peeping in. But, the poor dear, he's absent-minded about minute, whatever the word is. He has so much worry and work, while I do nothing but jabber to Bee. I mustn't forget the hominy. She was flying into the hall. Kennicott looked up from the Journal of the American Medical Society. "Hello, what time did you get back?" she cried. "About 9. You've been gadding. Here it is past 11. Good-natured, yet not quite approving. "Did it feel neglected?" "Well, you didn't remember to close the lower draft in the furnace." "Oh, I'm so sorry, but I don't often forget things like that, do I?" She dropped into his lap, and, after he had jerked back his head to save his eyeglasses, and removed the glasses, and settled her in a position less cramping to his legs, and casually cleared his throat, he kissed her amiably and remarked, "Nope, I must say you're fairly good about things like that. I wasn't kicking. I just meant I wouldn't want the fire to go out on us. Leave that draft open, and the fire might burn up and go out on us. And the nights are beginning to get pretty cold again. Pretty cold on my drive. I put the side curtains up, it was so chilly. But the generator is working all right now." "Yes, it is chilly, but I feel fine after my walk." "Go walking?" "I went up to see the Perrys." By a definite act of will she added the truth. "They weren't in, and I saw Guy Pollock. Dropped into his office." "Why, you haven't been sitting and chinning with him till 11 o'clock. "Of course there were some other people there, and— Will, what do you think of Dr. Westlake?" "Westlake? Why?" "I noticed him on the street today." "Was he limping? If the poor fish would have his teeth x-rayed, I'll bet 9.5 cents he'd find an abscess there. Rheumatism, he calls it. Rheumatism, hell. He's behind the times. Wonder he doesn't bleed himself. Well, a profound and serious yawn. I hate to break up the party, but it's getting late, and a doctor never knows when he'll get routed out before morning. She remembered that he had given this explanation in these words not less than 30 times in the year. I guess we better be trotting up to bed. I've wound the clock and looked at the furnace. Did you lock the front door when you came in? They trailed upstairs, after he had turned out the lights and twice tested the front door to make sure it was fast. While they talked, they were preparing for bed. Carol still sought to maintain privacy by undressing behind the screen of the closet door. Kennicott was not so reticent. Tonight, as every night, she was irritated by having to push the old plush chair out of the way before she could open the closet door. Every time she opened the door, she shoved the chair. 10 times an hour. But Kennicott liked to have the chair in the room, and there was no place for it except in front of the closet. She pushed it, felt angry, hid her anger. Kennicott was yawning, more portentously. The room smelled stale. She shrugged and became chatty. "You were speaking of Dr. Westlake. Tell me, you've never summed him up. Is he really a good doctor?" "Oh, yes. He's a wise old coot." "There. You see, there is no medical rivalry. Not in my house," she said triumphantly to Guy Pollock. She hung her silk petticoat on a closet hook and went on. "Dr. Westlake is so gentle and scholarly." "Well, I don't know as I'd say he was such a whale of a scholar. I've always had a suspicion he did a good deal of four-flushing about that. He likes to have people think he keeps up his French and Greek and Lord knows what all. And he's always got an old Dago book lying around in the sitting room. But I've got a hunch he reads detective stories about like the rest of us. And I don't know where he'd ever learned so doggone many languages anyway. He kind of lets people assume he went to Harvard or Berlin or Oxford or somewhere, but I looked him up in the medical register, and he graduated from a hick college in Pennsylvania way back in 1861. "But this is the important thing. Is he an honest doctor?" "How do you mean honest? Depends on what you mean." "Suppose you were sick. Would you call him in?" "Would you let me call him in?" "Not if I were well enough to cuss and bite, I wouldn't. No, sir. I wouldn't have the old fake in the house. Makes me tired, his everlasting palavering and soft soaping. He's all right for an ordinary bellyache or holding some fool woman's hand, but I wouldn't call him in for an honest-to-God illness. Not much I wouldn't. No, sir. You know I don't do much backbiting, but at the same time, I'll tell you, Carrie, I've never got over being sore at Westlake for the way he treated Mrs. Jonderquist. Nothing the matter with her. What she really needed was a rest. But Westlake kept calling on her and calling on her for weeks, almost every day, and sent her a good big fat bill, too, you can bet. I never did forgive him for that. Nice, decent, hard-working people like the Jonderquists." In her batiste nightgown, she was standing at the bureau engaged in the invariable rites of wishing that she had a real dressing-table with a triple mirror, of bending toward the streaky glass and raising her chin to inspect a pin-head mole on her throat, and finally of brushing her hair. In rhythm to the strokes she went on. "But, Will, there isn't any of what you might call financial rivalry between you and the partners, Westlake and McGanum, is there?" He flipped into bed with a solemn back somersault and a ludicrous kick of his heels as he tucked his legs under the blankets. He snorted, "Lord, no. I never begrudge any man a nickel he can get away from me, fairly." "But is Westlake fair? Isn't he sly?" "Sly isn't the word. He's a fox, that boy." She saw Guy Pollock's grin in the mirror. She flushed. Kennicott, with his arms behind his head, was yawning. "Yup, he's smooth, too smooth. But I bet I make pretty near as much as Westlake and McGanum both together, though I never wanted to grab more than my just share. If anybody wants to go to the partners instead of to me, that's his business. Though I must say it makes me tired when Westlake gets hold of the Dawsons." Here, Luke Dawson had been coming to me for every toe-ache and headache and a lot of little things that just wasted my time, and then, when his grandchild was here last summer and had a summer complaint, I suppose, or something like that, probably, you know, the time you and I drove up to Lac-Weir, why, Westlake got hold of Ma Dawson and scared her to death, and made her think the kid had appendicitis, and by golly, if he and McGanum didn't operate, and holler their heads off about the terrible adhesions they found, and what a regular Charlie and Will Mayo they were for classy surgery. They let on that if they'd waited 2 hours more, the kid would have developed peritonitis and God knows what all. And then they collected a nice fat $150, and probably they'd have charged $300 if they hadn't been afraid of me. I'm no hog, but I certainly do hate to give old Luke $10 worth of advice for $1.50, and then see $150 go glimmering. And if I can't do a better pendectomy than either Westlake or McGanum, I'll eat my hat. As she crept into bed, she was dazzled by Guy's blazing grin. She experimented. "But Westlake is cleverer than his son-in-law, don't you think?" "Yes, Westlake may be old-fashioned and all that, but he's got a certain amount of intuition, while McGanum goes into everything bull-headed and butts his way through like a damn yahoo, and tries to argue his patients into having whatever he diagnoses them as having. About the best thing Mac can do is stick to baby-snatching. He's just about on a par with this bone-pounding chiropractor female, Mrs. Mattie Gooch." "Mrs. Westlake and Mrs. McGanum, though, they're nice. They've been awfully cordial to me." "Well, no reason why they shouldn't be, is there? Oh, they're nice enough, though you can bet your bottom dollar they're both plugging for their husbands all the time, trying to get the business. And I don't know as I call it so damn cordial in Mrs. McGanum when I holler at her on the street and she nods back like she had a sore neck. Still, she's all right. It's Ma Westlake that makes the mischief, pussyfooting around all the time. But I wouldn't trust any Westlake out of the whole lot. And while Mrs. McGanum seems square enough, you don't never want to forget that she's Westlake's daughter, you bet." "What about Dr. Gould? Don't you think he's worse than either Westlake or McGanum? He's so cheap, drinking and playing pool and always smoking cigars in such a cocky way." "That's all right now. Terry Gould is a good deal of a tin-horn sport, but he knows a lot about medicine, and don't you forget it for 1 second." She stared down Guy's grin and asked more cheerfully, "Is he honest, too?" "Oh, gosh, I'm sleepy." He burrowed beneath the bedclothes in a luxurious stretch and came up like a diver, shaking his head as he complained, "How's that? Who? Terry Gould honest? Don't start me laughing. I'm too nice and sleepy. I didn't say he was honest. I said he had savvy enough to find the index in Gray's Anatomy, which is more than McGanum can do. But I didn't say anything about his being honest. He isn't. Terry is crooked as a dog's hind leg. He's done me more than one dirty trick. He told Mrs. Glorbach, 17 miles out, that I wasn't up to date in obstetrics. Fat lot of good it did him. She came right in and told me. And Terry's lazy. He let a pneumonia patient choke rather than interrupt a poker game." "Oh, no, I can't believe—" "Well, now, I'm telling you." "Does he play much poker? Dr. Dillon told me that Dr. Gould wanted him to play." "Dillon told you what? Where'd you meet Dillon? He's just come to town." "He and his wife were at Mr. Pollock's tonight." "Say, what did you think of them? Didn't Dillon strike you as pretty light-waisted?" "Why, no. He seemed intelligent. I'm sure he's much more wide-awake than our dentist." "Well, now, the old man is a good dentist. He knows his business. And Dillon, I wouldn't cuddle up to the Dillons too close if I were you. All right for Pollock, and that's none of our business. But I think I'd just give the Dillons the glad hand and pass 'em up." "But why? He isn't a rival." "That's all right." Kennicott was aggressively awake now. "He'll work right in with Westlake and McGanum. Matter of fact, I suspect they were largely responsible for his locating here. They'll be sending him patients, and he'll send all that he can get hold of to them. I don't trust anybody that's too much hand in glove with Westlake. You give Dillon a shot at some fellow that's just bought a farm here and drifts into town to get his teeth looked at, and after Dillon gets through with him, you'll see him edging around to Westlake and McGanum every time." Carol reached for her blouse, which hung on a chair by the bed. She draped it about her shoulders and sat up studying Kennicott, her chin in her hands. In the gray light from the small electric bulb down the hall, she could see that he was frowning. "Will, I must get this straight. Someone said to me the other day that in towns like this, even more than in cities, all the doctors hate each other because of the money." "Who said that?" "It doesn't matter. I'll bet a hat it was your Vida Sherwin. She's a brainy woman, but she'd be a damn sight brainier if she kept her mouth shut and didn't let so much of her brains ooze out that way." "Will! Oh, Will, that's horrible. Aside from the vulgarity. Some ways Vida is my best friend. Even if she had said it. Which, as a matter of fact, she didn't." He reared up his thick shoulders, in absurd pink and green flannelette pajamas. He sat straight, and irritatingly snapped his fingers, and growled, "Well, if she didn't say it, let's forget her. Doesn't make any difference who said it anyway. The point is that you believe it. God, to think you don't understand me any better than that. Money." "This is the first real quarrel we've ever had," she was agonizing. He thrust out his long arm and snatched his wrinkly vest from a chair. He took out a cigar, a match. He tossed the vest on the floor. He lighted the cigar and puffed savagely. He broke up the match and snapped the fragments at the footboard. She suddenly saw the footboard of the bed as the footstone of the grave of love. The room was drab-colored and ill-ventilated. Kennicott did not believe in opening the windows so darn wide that you heat all the outdoors. The stale air seemed never to change. In the light from the hall, they were two lumps of bedclothes with shoulders and tousled heads attached. She begged, "I didn't mean to wake you up, dear, and please don't smoke. You've been smoking so much. Please go back to sleep. I'm sorry." "Being sorry's all right, but I'm going to tell you one or two things. This falling for anybody's say-so about medical jealousy and competition is simply part and parcel of your usual willingness to think the worst you possibly can of us poor dubs in Gopher Prairie. Trouble with women like you is, you always want to argue. Can't take things the way they are. Got to argue. Well, I'm not going to argue about this in any way, shape, manner, or form. Trouble with you is, you don't make any effort to appreciate us. You're so damn superior, and think the city is such a hell of a lot finer place, and you want us to do what you want all the time." "That's not true. It's I who make the effort. It's you who stand back and criticize. I have to come over to the town's opinion. I have to devote myself to their interests. They can't even see my interests, to say nothing of adopting them. I get ever so excited about their old Lake Minniemashie and the cottages, but they simply guffaw, in that lovely friendly way you advertise so much, if I speak of wanting to see Taormino also." "Sure, Taormina, whatever that is. Some nice expensive millionaire colony, I suppose. Sure, that's the idea. Champagne taste and beer income. And make sure that we never have more than a beer income, too." "Are you by any chance implying that I am not economical?" "Well, I didn't intend to, but since you bring it up yourself, I don't mind saying the grocery bills are about twice what they ought to be." "Yes, they probably are. I'm not economical. I can't be, thanks to you." "Where'd you get that 'thanks to you'?" "Please don't be quite so colloquial, or shall I say vulgar?" "I'll be as damn colloquial as I want to. How do you get that 'thanks to you'? Here about a year ago you jumped me for not remembering to give you money. Well, I'm reasonable. I didn't blame you, and I said I was to blame. But have I ever forgotten it since, practically?" "No, you haven't, practically. But that isn't it. I ought to have an allowance. I will, too. I must have an agreement for a regular stated amount every month." "Fine idea. Of course, a doctor gets a regular stated amount. Sure, 1,000 one month, and lucky if he makes 100 the next." Very well then, a percentage. Or something else. No matter how much you vary, you can make a rough average for— But what's the idea? What are you trying to get at? Mean to say I'm unreasonable? Think I'm so unreliable and tightwad that you've got to tie me down with a contract? By God, that hurts. I thought I'd been pretty generous and decent, and I took a lot of pleasure. Thinks I, she'll be tickled when I hand over this 20, or 50, or whatever it was. And now it seems you've been wanting to make it a kind of alimony. Me like a poor fool, thinking I was liberal all the while, and you— Please stop pitying yourself. You're having a beautiful time feeling injured. I admit all you say, certainly. You've given me money both freely and amiably, quite as if I were your mistress. Carrie! I mean it. What was a magnificent spectacle of generosity to you was humiliation to me. You gave me money, gave it to your mistress, if she was complacent, and then you— Carrie! Don't interrupt me. Then you felt you discharged all obligation. Well, hereafter I'll refuse your money as a gift. Either I'm your partner, in charge of the household department of our business, with a regular budget for it, or else I'm nothing. If I'm to be a mistress, I shall choose my lovers. Oh, I hate it, this smirking and hoping for money, and then not even spending it on jewels as a mistress has a right to, but spending it on double boilers and socks for you. Yes, indeed, you're generous. You give $1 right out. The only proviso is that I must spend it on a tie for you, and you give it when and as you wish. How can I be anything but uneconomical? Oh, well, of course, looking at it that way. I can't shop around, can't buy in large quantities, have to stick to stores where I have a charge account a good deal of the time, can't plan because I don't know how much money I can depend on. That's what I pay for your charming sentimentalities about giving so generously. You make me— Wait! You know you're exaggerating. You never thought about that mistress stuff till just this minute. Matter of fact, you never have smirked and hoped for money. But all the same, you may be right. You ought to run the household as a business. I'll figure out a definite plan tomorrow, and hereafter you'll be on a regular amount or percentage, with your own checking account. Oh, that is decent of you. She turned toward him, trying to be affectionate, but his eyes were pink and unlovely in the flare of the match with which he lighted his dead and malodorous cigar. His head drooped, and a ridge of flesh scattered with pale small bristles bulged out under his chin. She sat in abeyance till he croaked, "No, 'tisn't specially decent. It's just fair, and God knows I want to be fair. But I expect others to be fair, too, and you're so high and mighty about people. Take Sam Clark, best soul that ever lived, honest and loyal and a damn good fellow. Yes, and a good shot at ducks, don't forget that. Well, and he is a good shot, too. Sam drops around in the evening to sit and visit, and by golly, just because he takes a dry smoke and rolls his cigar around in his mouth, and maybe splits a few times, you look at him as if he was a hog. Oh, you didn't know I was on to you, and I certainly hope Sam hasn't noticed it, but I never miss it." "I have felt that way. Spitting. Ugh. But I'm sorry you caught my thoughts. I tried to be nice. I tried to hide them." "Maybe I catch a whole lot more than you think I do." "Yes, perhaps you do." "And do you know why Sam doesn't light his cigar when he's here?" "Why?" "He's so darn afraid you'll be offended if he smokes. You scare him. Every time he speaks of the weather, you jump him because he ain't talking about poetry or Goethe or some other highbrow junk. You got him so leery he scarcely dares to come here." "Oh, I am sorry. Though I'm sure it's you who are exaggerating now." "Well, now, I don't know as I am. And I can tell you one thing. If you keep on, you'll manage to drive away every friend I've got." "That would be horrible of me. You know I don't mean to, Will. What is it about me that frightens Sam, if I do frighten him?" "Oh, you do all right. 'Stead of putting his legs up on another chair and unbuttoning his vest and telling a good story or maybe kidding me about something, He sits on the edge of his chair and tries to make conversation about politics, and he doesn't even cuss, and Sam's never real comfortable unless he can cuss a little. In other words, he isn't comfortable unless he can behave like a peasant in a mud hut. Now that'll be about enough of that. You want to know how you scare him? First, you deliberately fire some question at him that you know darn well he can't answer. Any fool could see you were experimenting with him. And then you shock him by talking of mistresses or something, like you were doing just now. Of course, the pure Samuel never speaks of such erring ladies in his private conversations. Not when there's ladies around. You can bet your life on that. So, the impurity lies in failing to pretend that— Now, we won't go into all that eugenics or whatever damn fad you choose to call it. As I say, first you shock him, and then you become so darn flighty that nobody can follow you. Either you want to dance, or you bang the piano, or else you get moody as the devil and don't want to talk or anything else. If you must be temperamental, why can't you be that way by yourself? My dear man, there is nothing I'd like better than to be by myself occasionally, to have a room of my own. I suppose you expect me to sit here and dream delicately and satisfy my temperamentality while you wander in from the bathroom with lather all over your face and shout, "See my brown pants?" Huh. He did not sound impressed. He made no answer. He turned out of bed, his feet making one solid thud on the floor. He marched from the room, a grotesque figure in baggy union pajamas. She heard him drawing a drink of water at the bathroom tap. She was furious at the contemptuousness of his exit. She snuggled down in bed and looked away from him as he returned. He ignored her. As he flumped into bed, he yawned and casually stated, "Well, you'll have plenty of privacy when we build a new house." "When?" "Oh, I'll build it all right. Don't you fret. But, of course, I don't expect any credit for it." Now it was she who grunted "huh," and ignored him, and felt independent and masterful as she shot up out of bed, turned her back on him, fished a lone and petrified chocolate out of her glove-box in the top right-hand drawer of the bureau, gnawed at it, found that it had coconut filling, said "damn," wished that she had not said it, so that she might be superior to his colloquialism, and hurled the chocolate into the wastebasket, where it made an evil and mocking clatter among the debris of torn linen collars and toothpaste box. Then, in great dignity and self-dramatization, she returned to bed. All this time he had been talking on, embroidering his assertion that he didn't expect any credit. She was reflecting that he was a rustic, that she hated him, that she had been insane to marry him, that she had married him only because she was tired of work, that she must get her long gloves cleaned, that she would never do anything more for him, and that she mustn't forget his hominy for breakfast. She was roused to attention by his storming, "I'm a fool to think about a new house. By the time I get it built, you'll probably have succeeded in your plan to get me completely in Dutch with every friend and every patient I've got." She sat up with a bounce. She said coldly, "Thank you very much for revealing your real opinion of me. If that's the way you feel, if I'm such a hindrance to you, I can't stay under this roof another minute. And I am perfectly well able to earn my own living. I will go at once, and you may get a divorce at your pleasure. What you want is a nice sweet cow of a woman who will enjoy having your dear friends talk about the weather and spit on the floor." "Tut, don't be a fool." "You will very soon find out whether I'm a fool or not. I mean it. Do you think I stay here 1 second after I found out that I was injuring you? At least I have enough sense of justice not to do that." "Please stop flying off at tangents, Carrie. This—" "Tangents? Tangents? Let me tell you. Isn't a theater play. It's a serious effort to have us get together on fundamentals. We've both been cranky and said a lot of things we didn't mean. I wish we were a couple of bloomin' poets and just talked about roses and moonshine, but we're human. All right, let's cut out jabbing at each other. Let's admit we both do fool things. See here, you know you feel superior to folks. You're not as bad as I say, but you're not as good as you say, not by a long shot. What's the reason you're so superior? Why can't you take folks as they are?" Her preparations for stalking out of the doll's house were not yet visible. She mused. "I think perhaps it's my childhood." She halted. When she went on, her voice had an artificial sound, her words the bookish quality of emotional meditation. "My father was the tenderest man in the world, but he did feel superior to ordinary people. Well, he was. And the Minnesota Valley. I used to sit there on the cliffs above Mankato for hours at a time, my chin in my hand, looking way down the valley, wanting to write poems. The shiny tilted roofs below me, and the river, and beyond it the level fields in the mist, and the rim of palisades across. It held my thoughts in. I lived in the valley. But the prairie, all my thoughts go flying off into the big space. Do you think it might be that?" Well, maybe. But, Carrie, you always talk so much about getting all you can out of life, and not letting the years slip by, and here you deliberately go and deprive yourself of a lot of real good home pleasure by not enjoying people unless they wear frock coats and trot out— "Morning clothes. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. To a lot of tea parties. Take Jack Elder. You think Jack hasn't got any ideas about anything but manufacturing and the tariff on lumber. But do you know that Jack is nutty about music? He'll put a grand opera record on the phonograph and sit and listen to it and close his eyes. Or you take Lime Cass. Ever realize what a well-informed man he is?" "But is he? Gopher Prairie calls anybody well-informed who's been through the state capitol and heard about Gladstone." "Now I'm telling you. Lime reads a lot. Solid stuff. History. Or take Mart Mahoney, the garage man. He's got a lot of Perry prints of famous pictures in his office. Or old Bingham Playfair, that died here about a year ago, lived 7 miles out. He was a captain in the Civil War and knew General Sherman, and they say he was a miner in Nevada right alongside of Mark Twain. You'll find these characters in all these small towns, and a pile of savvy in every single one of them, if you just dig for it." "I know, and I do love them, especially people like Champ Perry. But I can't be so very enthusiastic over the smug cits like Jack Elder." "Then I'm a smug cit too, whatever that is." "No, you're a scientist. Oh, I will try and get the music out of Mr. Elder. Only why can't he let it come out, instead of being ashamed of it and always talking about hunting dogs? But I will try. Is it all right now?" "Sure. But there's one other thing. You might give me some attention, too." "That's unjust. You have everything I am." "No, I haven't. You think you respect me. You always hand out some spiel about my being so useful, but you never think of me as having ambitions, just as much as you have." "Perhaps not. I think of you as being perfectly satisfied." "Well, I'm not by a long shot. I don't want to be a plug general practitioner all my life, like Westlake, and die in harness because I can't get out of it, and have 'em say, 'He was a good fellow, but he couldn't save a cent.' Not that I care a whoop what they say after I've kicked in and can't hear 'em, but I want to put enough money away so you and I can be independent some day, and not have to work unless we feel like it. And I want to have a good house. By golly, I'll have as good a house as anybody in this town. And if we want to travel and see your Tormina or whatever it is, why, we can do it, with enough money in our jeans so we won't have to take anything off anybody, or fret about our old age. You never worry about what might happen if we got sick and didn't have a good fat wad salted away, do you?" "I don't suppose I do." "Well then, I have to do it for you. And if you think for one moment I want to be stuck in this burg all my life, and not have a chance to travel and see the different points of interest and all that, then you simply don't get me. I want to have a squint at the world, much as you do. Only I'm practical about it. First place, I'm going to make the money. I'm investing in good, safe farmlands. Do you understand why now?" "Yes." "Will you try and see if you can't think of me as something more than just a dollar-chasing roughneck?" "Oh, my dear, I haven't been just. I am difficile. and I won't call on the Dillons. And if Dr. Dillon is working for Westlake and McGanum, I hate him. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of Main Street by Sinclair Lewis. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 15. That December she was in love with her husband. She romanticized herself not as a great reformer, but as the wife of a country physician. The realities of the doctor's household were colored by her pride. Late at night, a step on the wooden porch, heard through her confusion of sleep. The storm door opened, fumbling over the inner door panels, the buzz of the electric bell. Kennicott muttering, "Gall darn it," but patiently creeping out of bed, remembering to draw the covers up to keep her warm, feeling for slippers and bathrobe, clumping downstairs. From below, half heard in her drowsiness, a colloquy in the pidgin German of the farmers who have forgotten the old country language without learning the new. "Hello, Barney. Was willst du?" "Morgen, Doctor. Die Frau is ja awful sick. All night she had been having an awful pain in the belly." "How long she been this way?" "Wie lang, eh?" "I dunno, maybe 2 days." "Why didn't you come for me yesterday, instead of waking me up out of a sound sleep? Here it is 2 o'clock. So spät, warum, eh?" "Nun aber, I know it, but she got such a lot worse last evening. I thought maybe all the time it'd go away, but it got a lot worse." "Any fever?" "Well, ja, I think she got fever." "Which side is the pain on?" "Huh?" "Das Schmerz. Die Weh. Which side is it on? Here?" "So, right here it is." "Any rigidity there?" "Huh?" "Is it rigid? Stiff? I mean, does the belly feel hard to the fingers?" "I dunno. She ain't said yet." "What's she been eating?" "Well, I think about what we always eat. Maybe corned beef and cabbage and sausage, und so weiter. Doc, sie weint immer. All the time she holler like hell. I wish you come." "Well, all right, but you call me earlier next time. Look here, Barney, you better install a phone. Telephone haben. Some of you Dutchmen will be dying one of these days before you can fetch the doctor." The door closing. Barney's wagon, the wheel silent in the snow, but the wagon body rattling. Kennicott clicking the receiver hook to rouse the night telephone operator, giving a number, waiting, cursing mildly, waiting again, and at last growling, "Hello, Gus, this is the doctor. Say, send me up a team. Guess snow's too thick for a machine. Going 8 miles south." "All right." "Huh? The hell I will." "Don't you go back to sleep." "Huh? Well, that's all right now. You didn't wait so very darn long." "All right, Gus. Shoot her along. Bye." His step on the stairs, his quiet moving about the frigid room while he dressed, his abstracted and meaningless cough. She was supposed to be asleep. She was too exquisitely drowsy to break the charm by speaking. On a slip of paper laid on the bureau, she could hear the pencil grinding against the marble slab. He wrote his destination. He went out, hungry, chilly, unprotesting. And she, before she fell asleep again, loved him for his sturdiness, and saw the drama of his riding by night to the frightened household on the distant farm, pictured children standing at a window, waiting for him. He suddenly had in her eyes the heroism of a wireless operator on a ship in a collision, of an explorer, fever-clawed, deserted by his bearers, but going on, jungle, going. At 6, when the light faltered in as through ground glass and bleakly identified the chairs as gray rectangles, she heard his step on the porch, heard him at the furnace, the rattle of shaking the grate, the slow grinding removal of ashes, the shovel thrust into the coal bin, the abrupt clatter of the coal as it flew into the firebox, the fussy regulation of drafts, the daily sounds of a Gopher Prairie life, now first appealing to her as something brave and enduring, many-colored and free. She visioned the firebox, Flames turned to lemon and metallic gold as the coal dust sifted over them. Thin, twisty flutters of purple, ghost flames which gave no light, slipping up between the dark, banked coals. It was luxurious in bed, and the house would be warm for her when she rose, she reflected. What a worthless cat she was! What were her aspirations beside his capability? She awoke again as he dropped into bed. "Seems just a few minutes ago that you started out." "I've been away 4 hours. I've operated on a woman for appendicitis in a Dutch kitchen. Came awful close to losing her, too, but I pulled her through all right. Close squeak. Barney says he shot 10 rabbits last Sunday." He was instantly asleep. 1 hour of rest before he had to be up and ready for the farmers who came in early. She marveled that in what was to her but a night-blurred moment, he should have been in a distant place, have taken charge of a strange house, have slashed a woman, saved a life. What wonder he detested the lazy Westlake and McGanum? How could the easy Guy Pollock understand this skill and endurance? Then Kennicott was grumbling. 7:15. Aren't you ever going to get up for breakfast? And he was not a hero scientist, but a rather irritable and commonplace man who needed a shave. They had coffee, griddle cakes and sausages, and talked about Mrs. McGanum's atrocious alligator hide belt. Night witchery and morning delusion were alike forgotten in the march of realities and days. 2. Familiar to the doctor's wife was the man with an injured leg, driven in from the country on a Sunday afternoon and brought to the house. He sat in a rocker in the back of a lumber wagon, his face pale from the anguish of the jolting. His leg was thrust out before him, resting on a starch box and covered with a leather-bound horse blanket. His drab, courageous wife drove the wagon, and she helped Kennicott support him as he hobbled up the steps into the house. "Fellow cut his leg with an axe. Pretty bad gash. Halver Nelson, 9 miles out," Kennicott observed. Carol fluttered at the back of the room, childishly excited when she was sent to fetch towels and a basin of water. Kennicott lifted the farmer into a chair and chuckled. "There we are, Halver. We'll have you out fixing fences and drinking aquavit in a month." The farm wife sat on the couch, expressionless, bulky in a man's dogskin coat and unplumbed layers of jackets. The flowery silk handkerchief which she had worn over her head now hung about her seamed neck. Her white wool gloves lay in her lap. Kennicott drew from the injured leg the thick red German sock, the innumerous other socks of gray and white wool, then the spiral bandage. The leg was an unwholesome dead white, with the black hairs feeble and thin and flattened, and the scar a puckered line of crimson. Surely, Carol shuddered, this was not human flesh, the rosy, shining tissue of the amorous poets. Kennicott examined the scar, smiled at Halver and his wife, chanted, "Fine, b'gosh. Couldn't be better." The Nelsons looked deprecating. The farmer nodded a cue to his wife, and she mourned, "Well, how much we going to owe you, doctor?" "I guess it'll be, let's see, 1 drive out and 2 calls. I guess it'll be about $11 in all, Lena." "I don't know if we can pay you just a little while, doctor." Kennicott lumbered over to her, patted her shoulder, roared, "Why, Lord love you, sister, I won't worry if I never get it. You pay me next fall, when you get your crop. Carrie, suppose you or Bea could shake up a cup of coffee and some cold lamb for the Nelsons? They got a long, cold drive ahead." 3. He had been gone since morning. Her eyes ached with reading. Vida Sherwin could not come to tea. She wandered through the house, empty as the bleary street without. The problem of, will the doctor be home in time for supper, or shall I sit down without him, was important in the household. 6 was the rigid, the canonical supper hour, but at 6:30 he had not come. Much speculation with Bea. Had the obstetrical case taken longer than he had expected? Had he been called somewhere else? Was the snow much heavier out in the country, so that he should have taken a buggy or even a cutter instead of the car? Here in town it had melted a lot, but still. A honking, a shout. The motor engine raced before it was shut off. She hurried to the window. The car was a monster at rest after furious adventures. The headlights blazed on the clots of ice in the road, so that the tiniest lumps gave mountainous shadows, and the taillight cast a circle of ruby on the snow behind. Kennicott was opening the door, crying, "Here we are, old girl. Got stuck couple times, but we made it, by golly we made it, and here we be. Come on, food, eatin's." She rushed to him, patted his fur coat, the long hair smooth but chilly to her fingers. She joyously summoned Bee. "All right, he's here. We'll sit right down." 4. There were, to inform the doctor's wife of his successes, no clapping audiences, nor book reviews, nor honorary degrees. But there was a letter written by a German farmer recently moved from Minnesota to Saskatchewan. "Dear Sir, as you have been trading me for a few weeks this summer, and seen what is wrong with me, so in regarding to that, I want to thank you. The doctor here say what shot be wrong with me, and they give me some medicine, but it didn't help me like what you did. Now they claim that I wouldn't need any medicine at all. What you think? Well, I haven't been taking anything for about 1.5 months, but I don't get better, so I like to hear what you think about it. I feel like this discomfortable feeling around the stomach after eating, and that pain around the heart and down the arm, and about 3 to 3.5 hours after eating, I feel weak-like and dizzy and a dull headache. Now, you just let me know what you think about me. I do what you say." 5. She encountered Guy Pollock at the drugstore. He looked at her as though he had a right to. He spoke softly. "I haven't seen you the last few days." "No, I've been out in the country with Will several times. He's so— Do you know that people like you and me can never understand people like him? We're a pair of hypocritical loafers, you and I, while he quietly goes and does things." She nodded and smiled, and was very busy about purchasing boric acid. He stared after her and slipped away. When she found that he was gone, she was slightly disconcerted. 6. She could, at times, agree with Kennicott that the shaving and corsets familiarity of married life was not dreary vulgarity, but a wholesome frankness. That artificial reticences might merely be irritating. She was not much disturbed when for hours he sat about the living room in his honest socks. But she would not listen to his theory that all this romance stuff is simply moonshine. Elegant when you're courting, but no use busting yourself keeping it up all your life. She thought of surprises, games to vary the days. She knitted an astounding purple scarf, which she hid under his supper plate. When he discovered it, he looked embarrassed, and gasped, "Is today an anniversary or something? Gosh, I'd forgotten it." Once she filled a thermos bottle with hot coffee, a cornflakes box with cookies just baked by Bee, and bustled to his office at 3 in the afternoon. She hid her bundles in the hall and peeped in. The office was shabby. Kennicott had inherited it from a medical predecessor, and changed it only by adding a white enameled operating table, a sterilizer, a Röntgen ray apparatus, and a small portable typewriter. It was a suite of 2 rooms, a waiting room with straight chairs, shaky pine table, and those coverless and unknown magazines which are found only in the offices of dentists and doctors. The room beyond, looking on Main Street, was business office, consulting room, operating room, and, in an alcove, bacteriological and chemical laboratory. The wooden floors of both rooms were bare. The furniture was brown and scaly. Waiting for the doctor were 2 women, as still as though they were paralyzed, and a man in a railroad brakeman's uniform, holding his bandaged right hand with his tanned left. They stared at Carol. She sat modestly in a stiff chair, feeling frivolous and out of place. Kennicott appeared at the inner door, ushering out a bleached man with a trickle of wan beard, and consoling him, "All right, Dad, be careful about the sugar, and mind the diet I gave you. Get the prescription filled and come in and see me next week. Say, better not drink too much beer. All right, Dad." His voice was artificially hearty. He looked absently at Carol. He was a medical machine now, not a domestic machine. "What is it, Carrie?" he droned. "No hurry. Just wanted to say hello." "Well?" Self-pity, because he did not divine that this was a surprise party, rendered her sad and interesting to herself, and she had the pleasure of the martyrs in saying bravely to him, "It's nothing special. If you're busy long, I'll trot home." While she waited, she ceased to pity and began to mock herself. For the first time, she observed the waiting room. Oh yes, the doctor's family had to have OB panels and a wide couch and an electric percolator, but any hole was good enough for sick, tired common people who were nothing but the one means and excuse for the doctor's existing. No, she couldn't blame Kennicott. He was satisfied by the shabby chairs. He put up with them as his patients did. It was her neglected province, she who had been going about talking of rebuilding the whole town. When the patients were gone, she brought in her bundles. "What's those?" wondered Kennicott. "Turn your back. Look out of the window." He obeyed, not very much bored. When she cried, "Now!" a feast of cookies and small hard candies and hot coffee was spread on the roll-top desk in the inner room. His broad face lightened. "That's a new one on me. Never was more surprised in my life. And by golly, I believe I am hungry. Say, this is fine." When the first exhilaration of the surprise had declined, she demanded, "Will, I'm going to refurnish your waiting room." "What's the matter with it? It's all right." "It's not. It's hideous. We can afford to give your patients a better place, and it would be good for business." She felt tremendously politic. "Rats, I don't worry about the business. You look here now. As I told you, just because I like to tuck a few dollars away, I'll be switched if I'll stand for your thinking I'm nothing but a dollar-chasing—" "Stop it, quick. I'm not hurting your feelings. I'm not criticizing. I'm the adoring least one of thy harem. I just mean—" 2 days later, with pictures, wicker chairs, a rug, she had made the waiting room habitable, and Kennicott admitted, "Does look a lot better. Never thought much about it. Guess I need being bullied." She was convinced that she was gloriously content in her career as doctor's wife. 7. She tried to free herself from the speculation and disillusionment which had been twitching at her, sought to dismiss all the opinionation of an insurgent era. She wanted to shine upon the veal-faced, bristly-bearded Lyman Cass as much as upon Miles Bjornstam or Guy Pollock. She gave a reception for the Thanatopsis Club, but her real acquiring of merit was in calling upon that Mrs. Bogart, whose gossipy good opinion was so valuable to a doctor. Though the Bogart house was next door, she had entered it but 3 times. Now she put on her moleskin cap, which made her face small and innocent. She rubbed off the traces of a lipstick and fled across the alley before her admirable resolution should sneak away. The age of houses, like the age of men, was small relation to their years. The dull green cottage of the good Widow Bogart was 20 years old, but it had the antiquity of Cheops and the smell of mummy dust. Its neatness rebuked the street. The 2 stones by the path were painted yellow. The outhouse was so over-modestly masked with vines and lattice that it was not concealed at all. The last iron dog remaining in Gopher Prairie stood among whitewashed conch shells upon the lawn. The hallway was dismayingly scrubbed. The kitchen was an exercise in mathematics, with problems worked out in equidistant chairs. The parlor was kept for visitors. Carol suggested, "Let's sit in the kitchen. Please don't trouble to light the parlor stove." "No trouble at all. My gracious, and you coming so seldom and all, and the kitchen is a perfect sight. I try to keep it clean, but Cy will track mud all over it. I've spoken to him about it 100 times if I've spoken once. No, you sit right there, dearie, and I'll make a fire. No trouble at all. Practically no trouble at all." Mrs. Bogart groaned, rubbed her joints, and repeatedly dusted her hands while she made the fire, and when Carol tried to help, she lamented, "Oh, it doesn't matter. Guess I ain't good for much but toil and workin' anyway. Seems as though that's what a lot of folks think." The parlor was distinguished by an expanse of rag carpet from which, as they entered, Mrs. Bogart hastily picked one sad dead fly. In the center of the carpet was a rug depicting a red Newfoundland dog, reclining in a green and yellow daisy field and labeled "Our Friend." The parlor organ, tall and thin, was adorned with a mirror partly circular, partly square, and partly diamond-shaped, and with brackets holding a pot of geraniums, a mouth organ, and a copy of the Old-Time Hymnal. On the center table was a Sears Roebuck mail-order catalog, a silver frame with photographs of the Baptist Church and of an elderly clergyman, and an aluminum tray containing a rattlesnake's rattle and a broken spectacle lens. Mrs. Bogart spoke of the eloquence of the Reverend Mr. Zitterel, the coldness of cold days, the price of poplar wood, Dave Dyer's new haircut, and Cy Bogart's essential piety. "As I said to his Sunday school teacher, Cy may be a little wild, but that's because he's got so much better brains than a lot of these boys, and this farmer that claims he caught Cy stealing beggies is a liar, and I ought to have the law on him." Mrs. Bogart went thoroughly into the rumor that the girl waiter at Billy's lunch was not all she might be, or rather was quite all she might be. "My lands, what can you expect when everybody knows what her mother was? And if these traveling salesmen will let her alone, she would be all right, though I certainly don't believe she ought to be allowed to think she can pull the wool over our eyes. The sooner she's sent to the School for Incorrigible Girls down at Sauk Center, the better for all, and— Won't you just have a cup of coffee, Carol, dearie? I'm sure you won't mind old Auntie Bogart calling you by your first name, when you think how long I've known Will, and I was such a friend of his dear lovely mother when she lived here, and— Was that fur cap expensive? But don't you think it's awful the way folks talk in this town?" Mrs. Bogart hitched her chair nearer. Her large face, with its disturbing collection of moles and lone black hairs, wrinkled cunningly. She showed her decayed teeth in a reproving smile, and in the confidential voice of one who scents stale bedroom scandal, she breathed, "I just don't see how folks can talk and act the way they do. You don't know the things that go on under cover. This town— Why, it's only the religious training I've given Cy that's kept him so innocent of— things. Just the other day— I never pay no attention to stories, but I heard it mighty good and straight that Harry Haydock is carrying on with a girl that clerks in a store down in Minneapolis, and poor Juanita not knowing anything about it. Though maybe it's the judgment of God, because before she married Harry she acted up with more than one boy. Well, I don't like to say it, and maybe I ain't up to date, like Cy says, but I always believed a lady shouldn't even give names to all sorts of dreadful things. But just the same, I know there was at least one case where Juanita and a boy— well, they were just dreadful. And then there's that old Jensen the grocer, that thinks he's so plaguey smart, and I know he made up to a farmer's wife, and this awful man Bjornstam that does chores, and Nat Hicks, and— There was, it seemed, no person in town who was not living a life of shame except Mrs. Bogart, and naturally she resented it. She knew. She had always happened to be there. Once, she whispered, she was going by when an indiscreet window shade had been left up a couple of inches. Once she had noticed a man and a woman holding hands, and right at a Methodist sociable. Another thing, heaven knows I never want to start trouble, but I can't help what I see from my back steps, and I notice your hired girl Bee carrying on with the grocery boys and all. Mrs. Bogart, I trust Bee as I would myself. Oh, dearie, you don't understand me. I'm sure she's a good girl. I mean, she's green, and I hope that none of these horrid young men that there are around town will get her into trouble. It's their parents' fault, letting them run wild and hear evil things. If I had my way, there wouldn't be none of them, not boys nor girls neither, allowed to know anything about things till they was married. It's terrible the bald way that some folks talk. It just shows and gives away what awful thoughts they got inside them, and there's nothing can cure them except coming right to God and kneeling down like I do at prayer-meeting every Wednesday evening, and saying, 'Oh God, I would be a miserable sinner except for Thy grace.' I'd make every last one of these brats go to Sunday school and learn to think about nice things, 'stead of about cigarettes and goings-on. And these dances they have at the lodges are the worst thing that ever happened to this town. Lot of young men squeezing girls and finding out. Oh, it's dreadful. I've told the mayor he ought to put a stop to them, and there was one boy in this town, I don't want to be suspicious or uncharitable, but—" It was half an hour before Carol escaped. She stopped on her own porch and thought viciously, "If that woman is on the side of angels, then I have no choice. I must be on the side of the devil. But isn't she like me? She too wants to reform the town. She too criticizes everybody. She too thinks the men are vulgar and limited. Am I like her? This is ghastly." That evening she did not merely consent to play cribbage with Kennicott, she urged him to play. And she worked up a hectic interest in land deals and Sam Clark. 8. In courtship days, Kennicott had shown her a photograph of Nels Erdstrom's baby and log cabin, but she had never seen the Erdstroms. They had become merely patients of the doctor. Kennicott telephoned her on a mid-December afternoon. "Want to throw on your coat and drive out to the Erdstroms with me? Fairly warm. Nell's got the jaundice." "Oh, yes." She hastened to put on woolen stockings, high boots, sweater, muffler, cap, mittens. The snow was too thick and the ruts frozen too hard for the motor. They drove out in a clumsy high carriage. Tucked over them was a blue woolen cover, prickly to her wrists, and outside of it a buffalo robe, humble and moth-eaten now, used ever since the bison herds had streaked the prairie a few miles to the west. The scattered houses between which they passed in town were small and desolate in contrast to the expanse of huge snowy yards and wide street. They crossed the railroad tracks and instantly were in the farm country. The big piebald horses snorted clouds of steam and started to trot. The carriage squeaked in rhythm. Kennicott drove with clucks of, "There, boy, take it easy." He was thinking. He paid no attention to Carol. Yet it was he who commented, "Pretty nice over there," as they approached an oak grove where shifty winter sunlight quivered in the hollow between two snowdrifts. They drove from the natural prairie into a clear district which 20 years ago had been forest. The country seemed to stretch unchanging to the North Pole. Low hill, brush scraggly bottom, reedy creek, muskrat mound, fields with frozen brown clods thrust up through the snow. Her ears and nose were pinched. Her breath frosted her collar. Her fingers ached. "Getting colder," she said. "Yep." That was all their conversation for 3 miles. Yet she was happy. They reached Nels Edstrom's at 4, and with a throb she recognized the courageous venture which had lured her to Gopher Prairie, the cleared fields, furrows among stumps, a log cabin chinked with mud and roofed with dry hay. But Nels had prospered. He used the log cabin as a barn, and a new house reared up, a proud, unwise Gopher Prairie house, the more naked and ungraceful in its glossy white paint and pink trimmings. Every tree had been cut down. The house was so unsheltered, so battered by the wind, so bleakly thrust out into the harsh clearing, that Carol shivered. But they were welcomed warmly enough in the kitchen, with its crisp new plaster, its blackened nickel range, its cream separator in a corner. Mrs. Erdstrom begged her to sit in the parlor, where there was a phonograph and an oak and leather davenport, the prairie farmer's proofs of social progress, but she dropped down by the kitchen stove and insisted, "Please, don't mind me." When Mrs. Erdstrom had followed the doctor out of the room, Carol glanced in a friendly way at the grained pine cupboard, the framed Lutheran confirmations attest, the traces of fried eggs and sausages on the dining table against the wall, and a jewel among calendars, presenting not only a lithographic young woman with cherry lips and a Swedish advertisement of Axel Egge's grocery, but also a thermometer and a match holder. She saw that a boy of 4 or 5 was staring at her from the hall, a boy in gingham shirt and faded corduroy trousers, but large-eyed, firm-mouthed, wide-browed. He vanished, then peeped in again, biting his knuckles, turning his shoulder toward her in shyness. Didn't she remember? What was it? Kennicott sitting beside her at Fort Snelling, urging, "See how scared that baby is? Needs some woman like you." Magic had fluttered about her then, magic of sunset and cool air and the curiosity of lovers. She held out her hands as much to that sanctity as to the boy. He edged into the room, doubtfully sucking his thumb. "Hello," she said. "What's your name?" "He. "You're quite right. I agree with you. Silly people like me always ask children their names." He. "Come here, and I'll tell you the story of, well, I don't know what it will be about, but it will have a slim heroine and a Prince Charming." He stood stoically while she spun nonsense. His giggling ceased. She was winning him. Then the telephone bell. 2 long rings, 1 short. Mrs. Erdstrom galloped into the room, shrieked into the transmitter, "Well, yes, this is Erdstrom's place. Hey? Oh, you want a doctor?" Kennicott appeared, growled into the telephone, "Well, what do you want? Oh, hello, Dave. What do you want?" "Which Morgenroth's? Adolph's? All right. Amputation? Yeah, I see. Say, Dave, get Gus to harness up and take my surgical kit down there, and have him take some chloroform. I'll go straight down from here. May not get home tonight. You can get me at Adolph's." "Huh? No. Carrie can give the anesthetic, I guess. Goodbye." "Huh? No. Tell me about that tomorrow. Too damn many people always listening in on this farmer's line." He turned to Carol. "Adolph Morgenroth, farmer 10 miles southwest of town, got his arm crushed. Fixing his cowshed, and a post caved in on him. Smashed him up pretty bad. May have to amputate, Dave Dyer says. Afraid we'll have to go right from here. Darn sorry to drag you clear down there with me." "Please do. Don't mind me a bit." "Think you could give the anesthetic? Usually have my driver do it." "If you'll tell me how." "All right. Say, did you hear me putting one over on these goats that are always rubbering in on party wires? I hope they heard me. Well, now, Bessie, don't you worry about Nels. He's getting along all right. Tomorrow, you or one of the neighbors drive in and get this prescription filled at Dyer's. Give him a teaspoonful every 4 hours. Goodbye. Hello, here's the little fellow. My Lord, Bessie, it ain't possible this is the fellow that used to be so sickly. Why, say, he's a great big strapping Svenska now, going to be bigger'n his daddy." Kennicott's bluffness made the child squirm with a delight which Carol could not evoke. It was a humble wife who followed the busy doctor out to the carriage, and her ambition was not to play Rachmaninoff better, nor to build town halls, but to chuckle at babies. The sunset was merely a flush of rose on a dome of silver, with oak twigs and thin poplar branches against it, but a silo on the horizon changed from a red tank to a tower of violet misted over with gray. The purple road vanished, and without lights, in the darkness of a world destroyed, they swayed on, toward nothing. It was a bumpy cold way to the Morgenroth farm, and she was asleep when they arrived. Here was no glaring new house with a proud phonograph, but a low, whitewashed kitchen smelling of cream and cabbage. Adolph Morgenroth was lying on a couch in the rarely used dining room. His heavy, work-scarred wife was shaking her hands in anxiety. Carol felt that Kennicott would do something magnificent and startling. but he was casual. He greeted the man. "Well, well, Adolf, have to fix you up, eh?" Quietly to the wife. "Hat die Drugstore my schwarze Bag hier geschickt?" "So, schon. Wie viel Urists? 7? None. Lassen uns ein wenig Super Surst haben. Got any of that good beer left? Gibt's noch beer?" He had supped in 4 minutes. His coat off, his sleeves rolled up, he was scrubbing his hands in a tin basin in the sink, using the bar of yellow kitchen soap. Carol had not dared to look into the farther room while she labored over the supper of beer, rye bread, moist corned beef and cabbage set on the kitchen table. The man in there was groaning. In her one glance she had seen that his blue flannel shirt was open at a corded tobacco-brown neck, the hollows of which were sprinkled with thin black and gray hairs. He was covered with a sheet, like a corpse, and outside the sheet was his right arm, wrapped in towels stained with blood. But Kennicott strode into the other room gaily, and she followed him. With surprising delicacy in his large fingers, he unwrapped the towels and revealed an arm which, below the elbow, was a mass of blood and raw flesh. The man bellowed. The room grew thick about her. She was very seasick. She fled to a chair in the kitchen. Through the haze of nausea she heard Kennicott grumbling, "Afraid it will have to come off, Adolf. What did you do? Fall on a reaper blade? We'll fix it right up. Carol!" She couldn't get up. Then she was up, her knees like water, her stomach revolving 1,000 times a second, her eyes filmed, her ears full of roaring. She couldn't reach the dining room. She was going to faint. Then she was in the dining room, leaning against the wall, trying to smile, flushing hot and cold along her chest and sides, while Kennicott mumbled, "Say, help Mrs. Morganroth and me carry him in on the kitchen table. No, first go out and shove those 2 tables together, and put a blanket on them and a clean sheet." It was salvation to push the heavy tables, to scrub them, to be exact in placing the sheet. Her head cleared. She was able to look calmly in at her husband and the farm wife while they undressed the wailing man, got him into a clean nightgown, and washed his arm. Kennicott came to lay out his instruments. She realized that, with no hospital facilities, yet with no worry about it, her husband, was going to perform a surgical operation, that miraculous boldness of which one read in stories about famous surgeons. She helped them to move Adolf into the kitchen. The man was in such a funk that he would not use his legs. He was heavy, and smelled of sweat and the stable. But she put her arm about his waist, her sleek head by his chest. She tugged at him. She clicked her tongue in imitation of Kennicott's cheerful noises. When Adolf was on the table, Kennicott laid a hemispheric steel and cotton frame on his face. Suggested to Carol, "Now, you sit here at his head and keep the ether dripping. About this fast, see? I'll watch his breathing. Look who's here. Real anesthetist. Oxner hasn't got a better one. Class, eh? Now, Adolf, take it easy. This won't hurt a bit. Put you all nice and asleep, and it won't hurt a bit. Schweig mal. Bald schlaft man greit wie ein Kind. So. Bald geht's besser." As she let the ether drip, nervously trying to keep the rhythm that Kennicott had indicated, Carol stared at her husband with the abandon of hero worship. He shook his head. Bad light. Here, Mrs. Morganroth, you stand right here and hold this lamp. Here, und dieses lamp halten. So." By that streaky glimmer he worked, swiftly, at ease. The room was still. Carol tried to look at him, yet not look at the seeping blood, the crimson slash, the vicious scalpel. The ether fumes were sweet, choking. Her head seemed to be floating away from her body. Her arm was feeble. It was not the blood, but the grating of the surgical saw on the living bone that broke her, and she knew that she had to be fighting off nausea, that she was beaten. She was lost in dizziness. She heard Kennicott's voice. "Sick? Trot outdoors couple minutes. Adolf will stay under now." She was fumbling at the doorknob, which whirled in insulting circles. She was on the stoop, gasping, forcing air into her chest, her head clearing. As she returned, she caught the scene as a whole. The cavernous kitchen, 2 milk cans, a leaden patch by the wall, hams dangling from a beam, bats of light at the stove door, and in the center, illuminated by a small glass lamp held by a frightened stout woman, Dr. Kennicott bending over a body which was humped under a sheet. The surgeon, his bare arms daubed with blood, his hands, in pale yellow rubber gloves, loosening the tourniquet. His face without emotion, save when he threw up his head and clucked at the farm wife. "Hold that light steady just a second more. Knock bloss essen wenig." He speaks a vulgar, common, incorrect German of life and death and birth and the soil. I read the French and German of sentimental lovers and Christmas garlands. And I thought it was I who had the culture. She worshipped as she returned to her place. After a time he snapped, "That's enough. Don't give him any more ether." He was concentrated on tying an artery. His gruffness seemed heroic to her. As he shaped the flap of flesh, she murmured, "Oh, you are wonderful." He was surprised. "Why, this is a cinch. Now, if it had been like last week—" "Get me some more water." "Now, last week I had a case with an ooze in the peritoneal cavity, and by golly, if it wasn't a stomach ulcer that I hadn't suspected, and... there. Say, I certainly am sleepy. Let's turn in here. Too late to drive home, and tastes to me like a storm coming." 9. They slept on a feather bed with their fur coats over them. In the morning they broke ice in the pitcher, the vast flowered and gilt pitcher. Kennicott's storm had not come. When they set out it was hazy and growing warmer. After a mile she saw that he was studying a dark cloud in the north. He urged the horses to the run, but she forgot his usual haste in wonder at the tragic landscape. The pale snow, the prickles of old stubble, and the clumps of ragged brush faded into a gray obscurity. Under the hillocks were cold shadows. The willows about a farmhouse were agitated by the rising wind, and the patches of bare wood where the bark had peeled away were white as the flesh of a leper. The snowy sloughs were of a harsh flatness. The whole land was cruel, and a climbing cloud of slate-edged blackness dominated the sky. "Guess we're about in for a blizzard," speculated Kennicott. "We can make Ben McGonagall's anyway." "Blizzard? Really? Why—" "But still, we used to think they were fun when I was a girl. Daddy had to stay home from court, and we'd stand at the window and watch the snow." "Not much fun on the prairie. Get lost. Freeze to death. Take no chances." He chirruped at the horses. They were flying now, the carriage rocking on the hard ruts. The whole air suddenly crystallized into large, damp flakes. The horses and the buffalo robe were covered with snow. Her face was wet. The thin butt of the whip held a white ridge. The air became colder. The snowflakes were harder. They shot in level lines, clawing at her face. She could not see 100 feet ahead. Kennicott was stern. He bent forward, the reins firm in his coonskin gauntlets. She was certain that he would get through. He always got through things. Save for his presence, the world and all normal living disappeared. They were lost in the boiling snow. He leaned close to bawl, "Letting the horses have their heads. They'll get us home." With a terrifying bump they were off the road, slanting with 2 wheels in the ditch, but instantly they were jerked back as the horses fled on. She gasped. She tried to, and did not, feel brave as she pulled the woolen robe up about her chin. They were passing something like a dark wall on the right. "I know that barn!" he yelped. He pulled at the reins. Peeping from the covers, she saw his teeth pinch his lower lip, saw him scowl as he slackened and sawed and jerked sharply again at the racing horses. They stopped. "Farmhouse there! Put robe around you and come on!" he cried. It was like diving into icy water to climb out of the carriage, but on the ground she smiled at him, her face little and childish and pink above the buffalo robe over her shoulders. In a swirl of flakes which scratched at their eyes like a maniac darkness, he unbuckled the harness. He turned and plodded back, a ponderous, furry figure, holding the horses' bridles, Carol's hand dragging at his sleeve. They came to the cloudy bulk of a barn whose outer wall was directly upon the road. Feeling along it, he found a gate, led them into a yard, into the barn. The interior was warm. It stunned them with its languid quiet. He carefully drove the horses into stalls. Her toes were coals of pain. "Let's run for the house," she said. "Can't. Not yet. Might never find it. Might get lost 10 feet away from it. Sit over in this stall near the horses. We'll rush for the house when the blizzard lifts." "I'm so stiff, I can't walk." He carried her into the stall, stripped off her overshoes and boots, stopping to blow on his purple fingers as he fumbled at her laces. He rubbed her feet and covered her with the buffalo robe and horse blankets from the pile on the feed box. She was drowsy, hemmed in by the storm. She sighed, "You're so strong, and yet so skillful, and not afraid of blood or storm or... used to it. Only thing that's bothered me was a chance the ether fumes might explode last night." "I don't understand." "Why, Dave, the darn fool, sent me ether instead of chloroform, like I told him. And you know ether fumes are mighty inflammable, especially with that lamp right by the table. But I had to operate, of course. Wound chuck full of barnyard filth that way." "You knew all the time that both you and I might have been blown up? You knew it while you were operating?" "Sure. Didn't you? Why, what's the matter?" End of chapter 15.